Good. Okay, we're live.
So you old guys know I'm going to have to leave like 5 minutes before 10 because I'm going to have to jump into something at 10. Okay.
All right. Thank you. I'm just looking for the agenda from Sharon. It's not a part of last week's. Huh. It is posted though, right?
Let's see if I can find
She did say in one of those emails, I thought that she had posted it, but maybe I'm confusing an email about this with another
I think she
one.
posted a bunch of them last week, like 4 or 5 weeks worth.
Okay.
On the main ER9 website, policy committee agenda, I've got it.
Okay. I just don't have it in my email.
John, I'm going to put it in the chat as a link. And then
Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. All right, great. All right, so call to order this meeting of the Joint Boards of Education Policy Committee for Easton Reading Region 9 at 9 a.m. April 16th. First item is the approval of minutes from the April 9th Board of Education's meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank
you beat me, Chris.
Okay, Chris moves, Maureen seconds. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good, unanimously approved. It takes us to item 3 on the agenda, public comment. No members of the public being present. We'll move on to committee member comment. Hearing none, we'll go to discussion and possible action. We're in the CABE model policy review section, continuing our work from the last several weeks on the sort of on the questions that are generally found inside of the 9,000 series in the model policy manual as it relates to board bylaws, and specifically the sort of variation on that, which is how boards are going to sort of operate is a special question for us when we meet together and when we work together in joint committees or when we work together in joint meetings. And so it's been our aim over the course of the last several weeks to build out a set of guidelines sort of based on sort of what you would normally find in a single board's bylaws, while we're leaving that to the side and allowing individual boards to do that work on their own. We do need to figure out how we're going to work together when we do get together. So we've developed a set of recommendations in a presentation, and we are scheduled for April 22nd to get together with, as a joint policy committee. We've invited all of our board members to attend that and to participate in giving feedback in the recommendations that we're bringing forth. So the aim is to make sure that we're articulating those policies clearly, or those proposed sort of processes clearly to our board members, and that would be the aim of this meeting, to just continue that work to make sure we know what sort of how that conversation is going to go and what's going to be included in that. Any questions from anyone?
Nope. Onward.
Very good. Okay, so should all be seeing this now, and we're going to dive in here.
I love the group's tabs, John.
It's changed my life, I'll tell you that. All right. So starting with some of the discussion we had earlier this week when we met to talk about the sort of structure of the presentation. So we essentially talked about 5 different sections, and sort of starting with joint meeting and joint committee governance, then going to review and approval of shared contracts and bid procedures, review and approval of central office budget, matters impacting central office personnel, hiring, termination, salaries, negotiations, et cetera. And then finally, methods for reaching consensus. So I want to reference this document that we have been using as a way to sort of collect some of our sample language and sort of ideas about how sort of what we might present. But I do want to make sure that we're really well grounded inside of this presentation, that I can take the weekend to sort of grab any content that's missing and make sure that we're sourcing from the right places. So I just wanted to go through each one of the slides. I'm hoping we'll be able to address each one of these 5 topics in no more than 2 slides. I think in many cases we can do it in 1 slide. Ideally, this presentation doesn't get, larger than say 10 or 12 slides in total.
And John, would it be your intention to walk through the whole presentation before soliciting feedback, or stopping in each of these sections to solicit that feedback?
So I'm very open to suggestions. What I would hope to do is to get the start and get everyone to nod to, yes, we understand why we're here. We agree that this is meaningful work to do. And if we have to stay there and to debate that for a bit and make sure that everybody understands the purpose that we're articulating inside of the sort of benefits of acting now, as well as the sort of core sort of thesis of the work that we're doing, I think that is worthwhile to stop. And then I think at each sort of major section, each one of the 5 sections, going through and sort of trying to sort of present the idea in the slide and then sort of get feedback before moving on to the next, I think makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I agree. I think we might want to put some sort of timing signposts onto the slides then.
Yep.
So that everybody's aware, at the beginning, we have 5 sections. We're going to devote 10 minutes to each of these 5 sections.
Yeah.
Expect that it's not going to go into circles.
Right. Yeah. And I hope that on many of these, we're going to be able to go through even in less time. Yeah. Right. On some of these sections where we don't anticipate controversy, but yeah.
I just don't want to be in a position where we run out the clock before we get to meaty conversation, or people are worn out. So.
Agree.
But running down the clock might make sense in some respects, because you're going to have to build consensus on this slowly, guys. At least that's my thought. We're not just putting the meaty stuff at the end and that's our work. You're going to have to build to that, and you have to build consensus over the issues that people haven't wrapped their heads around yet.
100%. I just don't want to be in a situation where people are exhausted by the time they have to have meaningful conversation about things they might disagree about.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I also think that if we have to go to another meeting, right? This is not we stay on the line until we're done. This is if we're only to item number 2, or sort of topic number 2 or topic number 3, and we're an hour and a half in or 2 hours in, we say, okay, great. I mean, this is good progress. This is a good conversation. We want to get to the other 2 topics. Maybe, let's see if we can find.
Let's come back next Thursday or 2 weeks or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. We still have time ahead of the May 25th meeting, and I think that's good. Okay. All right, good. So, so looking at the 5 topics, right? We've got each one of them here. Joint meeting, joint committee governance. So joint meetings and joint committee governance, we have the sort of joint meeting governance content, I think, pretty well articulated inside of this document, which I've sort of copied and pasted over. This sort of how the chair is going to be selected, carrying out business, taking action. So actually, this is a joint committee piece.
Well, that first bullet is a joint meeting piece, because we're taking action on the recommendation of a committee.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's interesting. How is that different than any of the other topics that we would cover inside of a joint meeting? Is there something special that we would apply to that? Why do we call that one out in particular?
I think it's probably to suggest that the work of joint committees flows to the tri-boards as opposed to each of the individual boards, because they are working jointly for a joint purpose that is then endorsed by the boards working jointly.
Okay.
I think that's the one for which there is the greatest exception, in as much as, an amendment to the transportation contract can be approved by each of the boards sitting individually, just because it's a pro forma kind of thing.
Yeah.
But as a general principle, when it comes to substantive recommendations of joint committees, it should be heard by the board sitting jointly.
Okay. How do we think about, I mean, so when we're looking at those joint committees, joint transportation, food services, policy, curriculum is different, right? Because curriculum is just Easton and Reading. We don't have any other joint policies, right?
You would have you had the joint ad hoc central office committee when it comes to leasing. You will have ad hoc joint personnel search committees.
Okay.
But from a standing perspective, I think it's transportation, food service, and policy primarily.
Yep.
I think, is there a joint wellness committee?
I think there might be, but do you want to set up something that's separate for ad hoc committees versus standing committees?
Or do we want to call that out? Just make that very clearly: joint standing and ad hoc committees.
Sure.
Yeah, because I want to be careful about not getting too far into the weeds where we start having debate about what the difference between a standing committee and ad hoc committee is, and who should be charging them and all that stuff.
But that's going to be we're going to have to direct the comments away from that and say things that are strong, like we're not entertaining those kinds of questions at this slide. We'll entertain them later on or something.
Okay.
Right. We need to build,
control the conversation.
Yeah. We need foundational consensus before we can get into the weeds.
No question.
Okay. When we start talking about joint committee, go ahead.
John, just to clarify, there is a joint standing calendar committee,
yeah,
a joint standing DEI task force, a joint standing food service, joint standing health insurance, joint standing long range planning steering, joint standing wellness, joint standing transportation, joint standing policy, and joint standing negotiating.
Okay. So,
according to the ER9 website.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of those. I may have some questions about when's the last time some of those met, but yeah.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And what exactly joint standing steering is doing?
Right.
It's standing.
Standing steering.
Yeah, but we're all steering the ship here other ways. So
yeah.
Well, it's long range steering, which is supposed to be representatives of each of the individual districts' long range planning committees. But if each of the individual long range planning committees haven't been working, then there's nothing to steer collectively.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Improving the efficiency by consolidating presentations and other reports to contain information applicable to all three boards, subsequently equal parts. So that's a lot. But okay. Is there anything else we'd want to add to joint meeting governance?
I don't think so, John. I think that you can just make joint committee governance a bullet under joint meeting governance and state something that's in passing, or either delete it altogether from here.
I mean, joint committee governance is really establish, charge, and disband joint committees. I think it can be its own bullet. I don't think it needs the subsection.
I think you could actually put that right here.
Yep.
And then I would take this guy and put it there. Good.
Yep.
So what does this mean? Improve efficiency by consolidating presentations and other reports.
Basically taking the view that if, for example, the administration is going to give a presentation on the status of health insurance and our options, that rather than giving that presentation or involving our outside consultants on 3 consecutive Tuesdays, we do it all together.
Got it. So if we're talking about governance, we start with something that feels
procedural.
Yeah, right. We say like this is how the sort of the chair of the joint meetings is going to be set each year. Then we move into more sort of mission statement right? And it feels like we should actually be staying in that procedural mode.
Right. There's a bit of a hodgepodge in the arrangement here.
It's just a phraseology, John. It's not really that there aren't procedural elements to each of these.
Yep.
It's just a phrasing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say meetings shall carry out business that relates to sharing of resources, and then it sounds much more procedural than the purpose is to carry out business.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like these guys, you could put all of this into a paragraph at the top talking about what's the point of joint meetings and joint committee governance. That's summarized in these items. And then that's the why. And then the how is, here's one of the hows, but some of the other items that we're not including maybe fall into the category of, how we reach consensus, right? So a topic that I might add here is, how is the agenda formed, right? How do items get added to the agenda?
Right. Who's the ultimate authority on what gets added to what agenda? Because it's really 3 boards meeting at the same time.
Right. And I
think that's a little too weedy. I think from a consensus building perspective, you want to start with, here's the policy. It's like policies and regulations. Once you've established that this is the policy, the regulation becomes the chair of the tri-boards is the final arbiter of what goes on the agenda, subject to, constructive collaboration with the other 2 chairs or whatever it is. Like,
to that end, you remove the first bullet, not the subsequent one.
Right. Because the first one is much more of a sort of an operating manual as opposed to a policy. Although the first one is obviously the easiest one to find agreement around.
Right.
So do it as an example, right? So do the first 4 bullets and then say, by way of example, one of the things we do agree about very clearly on joint meetings governance is the following.
Okay.
And then leave it hanging. And go to the next slide, because you're going to come back to it and other things later on. But at least you're putting in the mindset, you're putting out something that everyone agrees to early on. I think that's more effective because you're planting in the minds of the people clear things that says, oh yeah, we agree to this. Okay, yeah. And we're gonna do that successively.
I think your 4 bullets now should have sort of a prefatory prompt that says, the purpose of a joint meetings is.
Yep.
Yes.
I would put into a sentence structure like the purpose of joint meetings is :
I think most of these I want to try to make less sentencey.
Got it.
Yeah. And I do want to try to get some some sort of icons in here, some stuff that's going to make this.
You're already tweaking out. There's too many words on the screen.
Yeah, there's so many words. There's so many words. And if we're going to have this many words, I think we should try to distribute this to everybody to review before the meeting. Okay. All right. So, or the meeting is purely, actually that is the purpose of the meeting. The meeting is to start to socialize this. This is not the presentation of these policies as a final draft. This is
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's fine.
This is a working conversation.
Yeah. Working conversation. Fair enough. Okay. And actually the policy example piece here is really helpful because people might say, okay, well, we're defining how the chairs are going to be selected. What about this? And what about this? And what about this? And it's perfect. Wonderful. Let's add those to the inventory of things that we need to have an approach for. And we will continue to work to, present options to the boards. Okay. All right, good. That's helpful. Let's take a look at, so after that, we go to review approval of shared contracts and bid procedures, which I have no content for. This is not in any of our, this document that we've been working on. What do we got?
I don't know much.
This is really kind of an approval and review of joint committee work kind of item that dovetails, because for the most part,
yes,
you're going to have joint committees who are in the weeds,
food services,
recommending vendors, recommending contract terms, and bringing them back.
Yep.
And ultimately, it's the three boards that have to ensure that the contracts are being vetted appropriately, or approving those contracts, or making sure that bid processes are being adhered to.
Agreed. Okay. Then would it make sense for us to say, to add that to some piece of this joint meeting governance and remove this as a separate section?
Yeah, maybe.
I think that's fine.
Take action on the recommendations of joint standing and ad hoc committees, including processes.
Another way to do it is to take each of those 4 bullets and for each of them include a concrete example, like what you've done at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, take action on, charge and disband joint committees. For example, charging the DEI task force. For example, approving the bus contract.
Mm-hmm.
So that people understand in concrete terms what it is we're talking about. Because the 3 of us understand it, but we've been living it a lot more closely.
You also don't want to get this slide too dense, though.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm wondering is whether this becomes multiple slides as a result.
Yeah, possibly. This could also be a. I think I could present this in a table,
mm-hmm.
right? Which lends itself more to taking these sentences and turning them into sort of more bullet points on the left hand side, and then we can have sort of left hand the thing, right hand the example.
Right. Purpose, example, and rule, basically.
So maybe that's the next slide, John. Maybe the next slide is the table.
Yeah.
Right. Leave the policy example here because you need to get that into people's sort of working memory. And then the next slide is the table. By the way, here are the following further examples, but not too detailed because you don't have consensus yet at all. And I don't want you to get derailed into example after example that people say, but what about? So.
Right, but it's easy to provide a table that has really concrete examples of recent collaborative experience that everyone can sort of relate back to.
Okay, or put the table there and say, by the way, you can consult the table for recent examples, but don't dwell on it when you present it.
Yeah.
Because I think if we dwell on each example, it will go south fast. I'm trying in my own mind to see just what John said, to see people nodding first before you build into details and before you get the folks who will not be nodding to say, but what about?
Yep.
You need to pull the people who will be nodding over first.
Need to build team nod quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I get the direction here.
This is almost Appendix A, John, instead of the next slide.
Yep.
It's almost see Appendix A.
Yep.
So that someone who wants to go down in the weeds, like when we write briefs, you can often find very interesting information in the footnotes. Sure. But you don't want to lead with that.
Yeah, agreed. And it's the kind of thing that if the conversation is going off the rails, somebody say, well, you don't have any examples, and say, okay, well, let's flip quickly to the appendix and let's talk about what we find there. Okay. All right, good. All right, so good.
And we can use appendices sort of as a show our work function. So even when we get down to dispute resolution, it's here's some stuff, and then in the appendix, it's here's all the things we've thought about, and here's all the other various ways in which this is an issue. But you know, if you really want to get lost in it.
So I think then this bullet here, because we're considering the sort of contracts and bid process to be a part of joint committee governance, that this bullet goes away.
That can come out, yeah.
Right. And 4 is better than 5 major items to go through. Review and approve central office budget. I'm just going to take this guy and move it down to our appendix section. Sorry, budget. Right. Same thing. Do we have documented anywhere what the central office budget process is?
No, but I think
that this is there.
Yeah, but this is an opportunity to respond to concerns that have been raised from different corners of the 3 boards about when is it our expectation that we are delivered what about the central office budget? And it's every year in October, we will meet to talk about, these items of the successive fiscal year's budget. Every year in January, we'll meet to settle on the fiscal year central office budget. However, at least X days before that, it's the expectation that, this information is distributed. Right. And this is the way that we're going to solicit questions in advance, and all of these things to give everybody peace of mind that they're not being sandbagged at 10 p.m. on January 23rd.
Yep. I like all of that. Anyone have that written down anywhere?
It says it right there. Lorem
That's
ipsum.
Our problem.
Yeah. I think that the lorem ipsum, dolor, et cetera, is from Nero. No one likes pain for pain itself.
The brown fox jumped over something.
I thought, what's the Latin expression for, you have to create it from the ground up? Sui generis? Is that not it? That's really more appropriate here.
Yeah. Lorem ipsum is standard filler language when working on user experience and mock-ups and things like that. So that's where it comes from.
Okay.
So, and I'm also struggling with the sort of distinction of sort of budget process as a separate item, as opposed to that going into the joint meetings and joint governance bucket, the same way that the
I think the reason you call out budget is that it's really a core function of the way the 3 boards work.
Sure.
Above all else, you can get away with not meeting jointly at all, except for you need to approve this budget.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that's an area where we can also build credibility by saying, look, we are working to find a way to make sure that we're not having concerns or questions, so that when we meet in January, we can get down to brass tacks about how we're going to do this on a level playing field. And, part of that is having an agreed to and understood timetable. Yeah. Because quite frankly, the October meeting maybe can or should include a review of the actuals from the prior year central office budget. Which I don't think we've ever really done, is say, how did the central office budget land? Where did we miss? Where did we hit? How is that being factored into next year's allocation?
That would be a hugely helpful conversation that I don't think I've ever seen had.
And are you suggesting that's October or January?
October.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the fiscal year will be closed and it'll be outside a live budget conversation, which is also helpful. And so you can say, tell me how we did last year in the central office, in the $1.82 million that we set aside for central office. Where did we hit? And that will help us all know what to expect in January, because it's, hey, we were over on we're under on health insurance. We're going to have to expect to be, up more than 10% on health insurance. That balance that, like, it is all helpful signposting.
Yeah. Is there any other sort of major component of the October meeting that?
I think it's budget drivers. I think if you're going to propose a new position in January, you signal that in October.
Anything else we would say makes sense for the October meeting? And I think there's something to that whole T-X. We should be receiving, these kinds of materials. I think that's really helpful to sort of lay that out and make that a standard operating procedure.
Right. I think you asked the central office. It's the whole, if there's no guardrails, people just will wait till the last minute because other things will always take priority.
Right.
But if you say the central office budget needs to be finalized and circulated no less than 2 weeks before the joint meeting, then you say to the boards, no less than 1 week before the joint meeting, you submit questions to the chair so that they can be addressed in the presentation. And then you have the meeting. And then you don't spend the meeting lamenting that you didn't have the information until the day of the meeting.
Right.
Or managing, collating, and processing the information on the fly.
Right. And particularly in a world where you don't really have, you might not have had the actuals until that minute, if you had them at all. And so I think this is all good from a timeline perspective. What's nested in here is questions about A, what happens if the three boards don't agree about what the central office budget should be?
Right.
And B, what happens if any of the three boards later down their process want to reopen the conversation about the central office budget because of their own individual budgetary concerns?
Right.
Well, that goes into questions under consensus. We're still building consensus. Yeah.
I agree with the sort of the process, but I think it's we should ask, or at least highlight, we should figure out how to start introducing the idea. Here are areas where we may need some help getting consensus, right? And sort of say areas that may require some help getting consensus. Okay, this, and this topic. Not to say we're now talking about how we get consensus. That's a topic in this presentation. We're going to talk about that. But do we all recognize these are sort of critical decision points?
I think if you skip that entirely here, you're exposing yourself to somebody asking the question, yeah, the timeline is great, but what happens when?
Correct.
And driving the bus to the side. I mean, you could just say, we'll get to that. That's a whole different conversation.
Right. Have we been approving in January?
Yeah.
Do we have a history of that? A solid
I believe
that?
Almost always we approve in that one January meeting. I believe 2 years ago, it took 2 meetings.
Okay. This will be good. Unagreeing. What do you mean unagreeing is not a word? Pretty sure I'm right.
It's almost process for reopening. So
yeah.
Because this is one where you can say, we agree only to reopen if one of the budget fails at the referendum level, or you can say that it could be petitioned to be reopened after a Board of Finance review, or you could say it could be petitioned to reopen whenever.
Right.
And also there's another question about central office budget to me, which is what is fertile for central office budget and what is not fertile for central office budget. And at its core, you can say the central office budget should be limited to salary and staff of the 13 individuals, salary and benefits of 13 individuals there, and the lease. Period, full stop. Or you can take a more expansive view and say that things like contracts for security services at all 5 buildings should be centralized so that they're all with one vendor and managed out of one office and then allocated, are they allocated back to the 5 buildings, or they sit in the central office budget to be allocated in thirds? What about, I think we're going to have a conversation in the next 18 months about technology. And if we bring on a central technology director, are we making central technology purchases and having a central technology plan? And what is the impact of that on the central office budget and otherwise?
Okay. How much more complex does this statement need to be about the scope of a central office budget?
So you're going to get contracts shared amongst all 5 schools doesn't work because we allocate the bus contract to the 3 districts individually. We don't centralize that. Mm-hmm. So to say that contracts shared are in the central office budget is incorrect.
Okay. So personnel, yes.
Right. Salary and benefits for personnel shared amongst the 5 schools. Or really, it's not even that. It's personnel that sit at central office. Overhead costs associated with central office, the lease, etc. Lease, copiers, printing, whatever. The infamous bagels for the convocation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think, Maureen, what do you think about sort of philosophically the central office budget and where its limits ought to be and what they should be confined to?
I think the central office budget should be confined to the 13 people in the building. I think it's easier to say that is the central office. I don't know, maybe I'm fixating on the idea of a physical place as opposed to a conceptual framework. So, I think in general here, we are getting a little down into the weeds in a way that the audience will not be ready for by this slide. That I will tell you. I think you got to stay general. The business about the meeting, you can say something about timelines in general, but the business about which meeting does what belongs like Appendix B or, for example, or something, because your timing here, you're going to be in 5 minutes in, if not less. And I think you're introducing too many things yet. That's just sort of from a presentation perspective, what I think.
So for this slide, it could be, joint expectations as to central office timeline and content.
That's a better way to say it. And then can't we all agree that, we know that we have 13 people in central office and that This is how we deal with the 13 people in central office. We know that there are other fringe issues. This is how we've sometimes dealt with the fringe issues, and then move on. Because this is still an introductory consensus building meeting. It's not everything we know. And I don't want this to be lost at point one, that's all.
Mm-hmm.
It's really valuable work. It's really long-term work. And, So I think you can leave salary and benefits for person. And you got to pardon me. I'm looking at this on my phone because I'm reluctant to change anything I have to sign into in the drop of 10, lest I not get in on the drop of 10.
Of course.
So I'm looking at this on my phone, but you can leave salary and benefits for personnel who sit in central office, overhead for office equipment, or something like contracts generally, or general approach to vendor contracts, general approach to contracts that impact all three districts, some sort of generalized language. And I would put that as the first bullet, and then salary and benefits for personnel as a sort of sub bullet, and overhead costs for central office equipment as a sub bullet about from contracts that impact the district.
So contracts that impact all three digits, and then the next two are sub bullets of that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I'm concerned about somebody saying that contracts that impact all three districts aren't necessarily the central office budget.
That's fair. That's fair.
So it's really contracts that impact central office. We're creating a circular definition.
Which becomes
right.
circular to the salary and benefits and the overhead costs. So I think we can actually kill that one.
Yeah.
And sort of leave it at that level of detail. Salary
or
benefits.
Other contractual issues. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Issues or questions or?
Issues is fine. Issues, concerns.
Okay, good. For timeline, we think more general language here, as opposed to
if you put in time. Yeah,
what?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say is timelines for other contractual issues, semicolon, inclusive of timelines for presentation and or something along those lines. I don't know. I'm always in favor of condensing.
So if the top,
because that allows you to control the conversation a little bit more, which is what I think you will want to do as you present this. You will want to control the conversation until you get the consensus.
Yeah, and it's really just to say, this is not like, no one has to choose any battles. No one has to die on any hill.
Agreed.
As part of this conversation.
Agreed.
This is simply to understand the geography, the topography, and
but
then
you're overcoming. We can't.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So, and if the top half of this is scope of central office budget, then the bottom half of the slide could basically be goals to establish an agreed upon timeline and for creating the budget, and
Timeline
to agree
and
upon, for central office budget, and basically nested in that is management of central office generally.
I like that.
I mean, I wonder if using this goals construct on each of these sub slides is helpful.
Yep. And I think it always starts with goals. Goals, scope, process questions. That's a really nice framework. And it's actually, remember this 3-column, right? Goals, right? scope, process questions. Okay. Everybody comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay. So
Eliminate your hanging bullet.
Which one?
They're gone.
Oh, that's funny. I just done that as you said that. Yep. Okay. So then rewinding goals. This is purpose of joint meetings is goals.
Or is goals to create a framework for a shared understanding of the mechanics of joint meetings.
Establish a timeline, standard operating procedure for creating management of central office budget.
Is the goal sort of the deliverable at the end of this, or the output?
Yeah, okay. Good. Establish a timeline and standard operating procedures for creating management of the central office budget.
So process question would be, how are committees formed? Who chairs meetings? How are agendas drafted? Goal is to have a uniform understanding of how board meetings are, how joint meetings are managed, directed, whatever.
I'm struggling to come up with so establish a timeline is budget process, establishing the timeline as well as standard operating procedures. This is not so much the timeline, but it is the standard operating procedures. Isn't that the answer on every one of these for goals? Establish the standard operating procedures for
Probably. Or it's to create consensus and document a standard way of working.
Right. It just becomes
very redundant.
Yep. On each one of these.
It's almost like the first slide is the overall goal of all of this.
Correct.
Is to commit to writing a shared understanding of all of these things.
Yep. Improve the efficiency.
But that's your repetition point.
Yep.
You keep repeating that same point with the first slide and the second slide and our point here is, and our point here is, and our point here is to do just that.
It's not necessarily a bad thing to keep reminding people why we're doing this.
Yep.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and it's really slide. I agree with that. So let's see if we can just scoot over there, and you can hang out there for now. Thank you.
You're so polite when you talk to your screen.
Well, you don't want to make your bullets feel bad. They did good work for us, but scope of Okay, salary and benefits, no, obviously not. Is it our purpose over here? Is it sort of tying to our purpose over here?
I'm having trouble seeing your screen right
now. Yeah, no, I think we all are actually, including me. Bear with me. Come here. Carry out the business that relates to sharing of resources. So I'm going to peek again at the central office.
It essentially is. It's just a matter of phrasing it.
Phrasing it properly.
Yeah. Like the way it's phrased now doesn't quite fit the prompt, but that's fine.
Right. Yep.
And I wouldn't even say improve efficiency, because that's not the purpose of joint meetings. The purpose of joint meetings is to efficiently conduct,
Right. So
our purpose is to improve efficiency, though.
Right. I mean, that might even go in the goal. Establish a standard operating procedure for joint meeting and committee governance to improve overall efficiency.
Okay. That's good. Okay. Then we've got the scope, which is just taking this purpose content and making it better, sort of better aligned to that piece. And then process questions. Come here. So we have our policy example. Come here, process questions. I think we have something like this. And I know, Maureen, you have to go in a minute, right?
Yeah, you got 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Make them count.
For what it's worth.
Yep. Okay.
If you want to do this again through the rest of this these slides, I'm sure we can find another time before the 22nd or even before next week, because I do think that this is valuable and it might be additional work other than the sort of standing weekly work. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So I'm happy to find a time after this call ends that we can focus on this as opposed to what we usually do on Friday morning.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be helpful. We'd be looking at
Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
And I think it would have to be Tuesday or Wednesday, right? Because we have to notice.
Yep.
So Tuesday I have my regular board meeting at 7:30. I could do something earlier, probably.
Do you want to do 9 a.m.
I could do something earlier on Tuesday. I could do 9 a.m. But I'm going to have to get out at 9:55.
I'll have to check and I don't even know where my work phone is, which is a really good sign that I'm doing spring break right. But the
20th in the evening is okay too, or the later afternoon.
Okay.
I don't know about you, Chris, but the 20th in the later afternoon is okay.
Okay.
I'm pretty flexible on the 20th. John has his board meeting in the evening.
Yep. Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
All right. I'm leaving you guys.
Helpful. All right. Thank you.
Good.
Motion
We're
to
adjourned.
Yeah. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Everyone in favor? Okay.
Aye.
Good.
Thank you, Maureen.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Okay.